Hey, here's our top fan, my friend Merlin Wendelbo, who's quite a good shot, actually, as it turns out. The more I watch the anti-Trump circus, it seems to boil down to the eternal contempt of old money for the nouveau riche. One of America's founding principles is rejection of aristocracy, especially amongst the sheep-level liberals. How do we expose the fact that the liberal elite is the aristocracy and that Trump is the man of the people who would normally be the hero of the average college liberal? Um, well, absolutely right. I think the only part I would quarrel with is that I don't think the average college liberal has ever really had admiration for the people. They've had pity on the people, and they've had a strong desire to do what they could to make the lives of those, poor Neanderthals in the great unwashed with the sloping foreheads and knuckle dragging Neanderthals out in the middle of flyover country. They feel it's that it's the liberal man's burden to lift common man out of his horrendously racist, stupid, anti-science, gun and religion loving superstitions. Trump carried working people. As I've said before, if the Democratic Party loses blue collar workers, it doesn't just lose a voting bloc, it loses its entire soul, its entire identity. That process is underway. They cannot help themselves. There are some things that human nature cannot put a brake on, and self-congratulation is one of them. So the liberal elites that have taken over the Democratic Party are going to make more and more and more decisions that are more and more ridiculous, more and more constraining, less and less reasonable, and we have to hope that people will wake up to that before the shooting match is over. Um, uh, Certainly, if you listen to liberals or elitists, but I repeat myself, if you listen to them talk about populism, they have nothing but sneering contempt for it. And they'll tell you that a populist is basically a snake oil salesman who sells patriotism to the rubes. And, and they have nothing but contempt for it because they think it's false. They think it's phony. How can it be true? You can't possibly be ready to be president or some higher level person and actually believe in the general public. I mean, that's just plain nonsense. It's insane to them. So they think all of this populist stuff is just basically posturing by other cynical liberals like themselves. But no. There are some people who actually have had enough experience talking to regular people and having had the grace to have had a little humility beaten into them, to discover that there's not a person out there in flyover country that doesn't know more than I do about hundreds of things. Hundreds of things. They're much more well informed about than I am, and I consider myself to be a pretty well informed guy, and so do these progressives and these university teachers and all the rest. But they're too possessed by pride to see how limited they are. Where scientists are often in the same boat too. You become so smart in one area that you assume that intelligence carries over to every other area, when in fact what it actually does is blind you, makes you assume that the world behaves like your computer model or your laboratory. And that's a fundamental misassumption, and you'd think somebody with those levels of intelligence would understand that. But the reason that scientists are scientists is because they're capable of producing an enormous amount of intellectual energy on focusing it on a tiny, tiny, tiny little dot. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way at all. Figuring out how to take one of these things from 64 gigabytes to 256 gigabytes requires the ability to focus your mind and not just do engineering but science and all the rest of it. But because they have that focus, they don't see the bigger picture, and they don't seem it's funny for me. It's not funny. It's tragic for me to watch these so-called either scientists or people who worship science. Like, I believe in science. Once you hear somebody say, "I believe in science," I don't believe in religion. I believe in science. You know, you're talking to an idiot. Not necessarily because they don't believe in religion, but because if they say, "I don't believe in religion, I believe in science," they've simply immediately admitted to you they don't know anything about science, and they've also told you that science is their religion. And science isn't a religion. Science is not a religion. Science is not a belief system. Science is a set of rules for learning things from nature, and to say that I believe in science is to show that you really don't know really much about what you're talking about. I am well aware of and enormously respectful and admiring of scientific achievement. But I also know where the handle of the hammer stops, you know. Science is a way of thinking about a specific, particular task that's designed to eliminate as many human variables as possible. And when it's done according to that formula, it does a remarkable job, an astonishing job. But when you try to apply that very deep, intense, maybe world-leading intelligence in one particular exceedingly narrow field and apply that to the rest of society, you've just made a really stupid mistake. One of the things I've talked about before, and I just happen to like, is, you know, you'll occasionally see progressives putting up these memes, and it'll be a picture of Albert Einstein, who I think without question was the smartest human who ever lived, and certainly he's in the top 5. And you'll see there'll be a picture of Einstein, black and white picture, and he'll have the big mustache and the wild hair and very high contrast lighting, and then in type, you know, in front, floating in the black area in front of his side, there will be in big white letters, you cannot simultaneously prevent and prepare for war at the same time, something almost exactly like that. And then you'll see liberals repeating this because they're not as smart as Einstein, and they know they're not as smart as Einstein, but they want to sound like they are. So they said, if Einstein said this, and Einstein's the smartest guy who ever lived, then see, it's got to be true. This pacifism thing is so obviously true that even Einstein believes it. But the response to that is pretty much immediate, and that is, if you want to have a conversation about what happens as you approach the speed of light, then Einstein's your guy. But you wouldn't go to Albert Einstein for fashion tips. You wouldn't go to Albert Einstein for grooming tips. You wouldn't go to Albert Einstein for dating tips. What on earth makes you think you would listen to Albert Einstein for political tips? The fact that he's able to travel at the speed of light in an elevator, or to turn on the headlights of a car that's moving at the speed of light and wondering what happens, his ability to do that not only does not give him ability to do that on a wider scale of society, it enormously limits it. It's ridiculous to assume that Albert Einstein would know anything about people, because he's not a person in the way that we understand the word. His intellect is so large and so focused, but it is not of this earth. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He believed, as John Pershing just wrote, John Pershing said Einstein had great physics insights. He also believed a lot of socialist collectivist nonsense. Absolutely right. He believed a bunch of nonsense. My understanding is that he was offered the first presidency of the state of Israel. He turned it down, and thank God for the state of Israel that he did. If you want somebody's opinion on quantum physics or theory of gravity or space-time, by all means, put up a picture of Albert Einstein and any quotes he may have, like God does not play dice with the universe, which is a great quote, apparently not true. Apparently he does. And that's another thing, by the way, just because he's Einstein doesn't mean he's not wrong. He's wrong often enough for it to be a statistical number, you know, and he's wrong about quantum. So there's that as well. But this whole thing with science is just, it surprises me that people that smart can be that stupid. I mean, you would think that they would have the insight to do it, but I guess it's ego, it's a pride issue, really, not so much intellect issue. It's a pride issue. And now you get down to the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and I think certainly my experience in life, to whatever degree I've managed to achieve some wisdom, which is a significant amount of wisdom over where I used to be anyway, let's put it that way. I'm struck again and again and again that the fundamental quality of wisdom, I think, is humility, and that humility almost always has to be beaten into you, because if you're going to be smart enough to be wise about something, chances are pretty good you're going to be smart enough to think you've got all the answers, and that has to be stricken from the records, which is usually an exceedingly painful and long process. To be smart enough to be able to have some kind of actual insight into things, you have to have the humility to see beyond your own limitations, or recognize that you have limitations in the first place. And usually that kind of humility does not go hand in hand with exceptional aptitude of any kind, sports or intellectual or whatever the case may be. AKA Woody Fool says, if you want to see wisdom, watch Mike Rowe's Bosses on Dirty Jobs. Absolutely true. But an even better point there is, if you want to see wisdom, watch Mike Rowe. Because Mike Rowe, who I've had a chance to meet and know and ran into at the airport, and I love the guy. And we were at a meeting once, and he was talking about this video, and said, anybody seen this video about this, where this guy breaks down the cost of what it costs to do in a year, and it's pretty good. Have you seen it? And somebody said, this guy over here, look familiar, and I said, oh my God, it's you. So Mike Rowe's actually wise, and he's wise because he's smart, but he's also wise because he's humble. Mike Rowe is the only celebrity I can think of that I would be 100% confident in as president of the United States. He's got a much better temperament than I do, and a much more grounded personality than just about anybody in show business. And yet at the same time, he has the insight and the skill to be able to do what I was trying to do earlier today with the story of Taffy 3. Mike Rowe's talent is his ability to tell common stories in a way that was entertaining. And that's not an easy thing to do. But when Mike Rowe was doing Dirty Jobs, and the first Dirty Job was Deadliest Catch, I mean, that's where he got started. And that's the dirtiest job there is, the most dangerous job there is anyway. So when you see Mike Rowe doing what I talked about earlier, I want to say it was beginning of last year, I guess, somewhere. When you see Mike Rowe crawling underneath a house to remove dead, rotting animals, and then coming out and barfing all over the place, you have to ask yourself, why is Mike Rowe doing that? He doesn't need to do it. He doesn't need the money. So why did he do Dirty Jobs in the first place? He did it out of wisdom, I think, and I really do think this is the case. To the limited degree I've talked to him about it, I think he did it for the same reason I told the Taffy story, which is I think he feels an obligation to the people who do this horrible work and get no recognition at all, while the people who do the easiest and most pointless and superficial stuff in our society are on everybody's name. Everybody knows their face, and they make millions of dollars. Being humble enough to go into a tannery, let's say, or to work in I can't think of all the different dirty jobs he's done, but sewage treatment plants and all the rest. Mike Rowe gets dirty, and I don't mean just like dusty. He gets filthy, and he gets filthy because he feels obligated to the people who get the filthy every day and aren't famous and and recognize the way Mike Rowe is. So anyway, he's a super guy. He's just one of my favorite people I ever met in my life, and I'm enormously proud to be on the same side as he is, at least in the common sense battle.